Most growers are addicted to a product they could replace with a shovel and a single perennial plant. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't care about the soil, but because agriculture convinced them that fertility has to come in a bag. Buried just a few feet beneath your boots, there's a system that can pull nutrients from 10 feet down. It generates up to 100 tons of biomass per acre and turns itself into fertilizer again and again, without invoices, without factories, without permission, and almost nobody talks about it. This isn't folklore. It isn't a fringe gardening trick. It's a biological engine, once studied seriously as a replacement for chemical fertilizers, a plant that builds soil faster, a closed-loop system that regenerates itself for decades. So why did it disappear? The answer has less to do with safety or science and more to do with leverage. When profit collides with a plant designed to give everything away, one of them wins. That plant is Bocking 14 comfrey. This isn't just another leafy green in a garden bed, it's infrastructure. Each spring, thick leaves surge upward, powered by a taproot that drills 6 to 10 feet into the earth. While shallow-rooted crops compete for surface scraps, this plant mines untouched mineral reserves deep in the subsoil. Potassium, calcium, nitrogen, phosphorus, pulled from layers most crops will never reach. And then, it does something extraordinary. You cut it to the ground. 4 weeks later, it's back. Lush, dense, ready again. 4 to 5 harvests per season, year after year. No replanting, no fertilizer input, no tilling. British field trials in the 1960s and 70s measured yields approaching 100 tons of leafy biomass per acre, even on poor soils. That isn't theoretical, that isn't best case marketing, that's recorded data. Each leaf carries concentrated nutrients, 2 to 3% nitrogen, potassium levels climbing towards 7%, far beyond traditional farmyard manure. Lay those leaves as mulch. Within 48 hours they collapse into the soil. Low fiber content means rapid microbial breakdown. No waiting weeks for decomposition, no nitrogen lockup, cut, drop, repeat. The taproot drills deeper each year, fracturing clay, improving drainage, unlocking minerals. The leaves act as a conveyor belt, bringing deep reserves back to the surface, where vegetables and fruit trees can access them. Over decades, a single patch can transform exhausted ground into rich living soil. And here's the strategic advantage most people miss. Bocking 14 is sterile. It doesn't spread by seed. It stays where you plant it. Controlled abundance, managed fertility. No invasiveness. It's a nutrient mine you own. Plant it once, and for 20 years or more. You have a living fertilizer factory operating on sunlight and rainfall, no subscription, no supply chain, no annual dependency. This is where the story shifts. In 1954, a young British horticulturalist named Lawrence D. Hills saw what others ignored. Post-war Britain faced rationing, tired soils, and fragile food systems. Hills believed fertility shouldn't depend on imported inputs or chemical factories. He founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association in a rented cottage in Bocking, Essex, determined to prove that comfrey could feed people and livestock without chemicals. But wild comfrey had a problem. It spread aggressively by seed. Farmers wouldn't risk their fields. So, Hills began collecting strains from across Britain. He crossbred Russian comfrey for vigor, with common varieties, searching for sterility, disease resistance, and high nutrient density. Years of muddy, methodical work followed. Data logs filled with yield charts, regrowth rates measured, mineral analyses recorded. By the early 1960s, one strain stood above the rest. Bocking 14. Sterile, rust-resistant, exceptionally high in potassium, relentlessly productive. Hills didn't patent it. He mailed root cuttings to anyone who asked. Gardeners, smallholders, experimenters overseas, no licensing fees, no corporate lock-in. Just a plant that multiplied by root division and returned fertility to anyone willing to cut and carry its leaves. And that's where things get uncomfortable, because when fertility becomes something you grow instead of something you buy, the economics shift. Mid-century agriculture was accelerating toward factory-made convenience. Synthetic fertilizers arrived in bright bags, stamped with precise NPK numbers, measured to the gram, applied in minutes, no harvesting, no chopping, no waiting. Why spend an hour cutting comfrey when 5 minutes with blue granules could feed an entire row? The math looked simple, but the deeper math, ownership versus dependency, was rarely discussed. One system demands ongoing purchases, the other demands a patch of land and a blade, and when convenience aligns with profit, convenience wins the marketing war. Comfrey didn't fail in the soil, it faded in the narrative. While advertisements promised clean boots and predictable yields, the idea of managing a living fertility system began to look old-fashioned, labor-intensive, inefficient. But here's the quiet truth. A perennial that regenerates itself for decades is not inefficient. It's capital, it's infrastructure. It's a low-input asset that compounds over time. The question was never whether comfrey worked. The question was whether a self-renewing nutrient mine fit into a system built on annual sales. And that tension between biology and industry is where the story of its disappearance really begins. Convenience didn't just change farming, it changed how people measured value. By the 1960s, synthetic fertilizer had become the symbol of progress. Bright sacks stamped with clean, confident numbers. 10, 10, 10, 20, 20, 20 promised precision. Measured nutrients, predictable yields, no cutting, no hauling, no waiting for leaves to rot. The Haber-Bosch process had made nitrogen from thin air, and industry framed it as a miracle. Extension offices pushed it, trade groups amplified it, government pamphlets reinforced it. The message was simple. Modern farming means less labor and more control. And on the surface, that argument made sense. Why spend an hour harvesting comfrey when a scoop of blue granules could fertilize a bed in minutes? Why manage a perennial fertility crop when a truck could deliver nutrients in bulk? The problem wasn't performance, it was perception. Comfrey demanded involvement. Synthetic fertilizer demanded payment. In a world optimizing for speed, the plant that required a blade and a few minutes of cutting began to look inefficient. The deeper economics, owning fertility versus renting it season after season, were quietly ignored. Then came another blow. In 2001, the FDA restricted comfrey supplements due to pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds that can damage the liver when ingested in concentrated forms. The ruling targeted capsules, extracts, and teas, meant for human consumption, but headlines rarely explain nuance. Comfrey banned traveled faster. Then comfrey supplement restricted. Garden centers, already cautious about liability, didn't want to navigate that conversation. Rather than clarify the difference between ingesting concentrated root extracts and using fresh leaves as mulch, many simply removed it from shelves. No law banned it as fertilizer. No regulation prohibited planting it in soil. But reputation shifted. Once labeled toxic in public discourse, comfrey became something retailers avoided. And in a market driven by perception, absence quickly becomes irrelevance. Meanwhile, the soil told a different story. When used as mulch or compost, the same alkaloids. That raised concerns in supplements break down in the soil. Microbial life degrades them rapidly. No regulatory agency has ever banned comfrey for agricultural use. No credible evidence links comfrey mulch to toxins in crops. But markets don't operate purely on evidence. They operate on simplicity, and simplicity favored the bag. While mainstream gardening moved toward annual inputs, comfrey retreated into quieter circles. Organic growers, permaculture designers, smallholders focused on resilience instead of convenience. The plant didn't disappear, it just stopped being marketed. Yet its numbers never changed. Fresh Bocking, 14 leaves still test at roughly 2 to 3% nitrogen, around 1% phosphorus, potassium levels that can reach 7%, levels that dwarf typical farmyard manure, which often struggles to reach 1.5% potassium. For fruiting crops, tomatoes, peppers, berries, squash, potassium isn't optional. It drives flower production, fruit size, sugar development, structural strength. Comfrey delivers it in abundance, and because the leaves are low in fiber, they decompose rapidly. Toss them onto a compost heap and the temperature can jump 10 to 15 degrees within hours. Microbes swarm. Decomposition accelerates. A stalled pile comes back to life. This is why growers call it a compost activator. Where straw or woody materials linger for weeks, comfrey leaves soften and collapse in days. Nutrients are released quickly, feeding soil organisms and root systems almost immediately. Then there's the liquid form. Pack a container with fresh leaves. Add water, let it ferment. The result isn't pleasant in smell, but it's powerful. Comfrey tea often tests around a 2:1:3 NPK ratio, heavy on potassium. Comparable or superior to many commercial tomato fertilizers. Except this version isn't purchased, it's harvested. And that distinction matters more than most growers realize. Because every time you replace a bag with a plant, you shift leverage. One path locks you into annual expense. The other compounds over time. Plant once, cut repeatedly, reinvest the fertility back into your soil. Repeat the cycle next year without another transaction. Over a decade, that difference becomes measurable. A small orchard replacing 12 bags of commercial fertilizer per year with comfrey mulch eliminates not just cost, but dependency. Thousands saved, soil structure improved. Earthworm populations increased, carbon footprint reduced. An urban gardener on a balcony can reduce fertilizer spending by 70% using a single perennial patch and homemade liquid feed. Even in containers, the cycle works. This isn't nostalgia for pre-industrial farming, it's strategic positioning. Direct-to-consumer growers, small farms, backyard market gardeners, homesteaders operate in a different economy than commodity producers. They don't win by maximizing acres. They win by maximizing margin, reducing input costs, and building systems that strengthen over time. Comfrey fits that model. It's not about replacing every tool with a leaf. It's about eliminating unnecessary dependency, where biology already offers an alternative. Right now, fertilizer prices fluctuate wildly. Global supply chain strain, energy costs rise. Meanwhile, soil health declines under heavy chemical reliance. And buried beneath that noise is a perennial that regenerates itself 5 times a season. The tension isn't about safety, it's about narrative. Do you build fertility from sunlight and root depth, or from invoices and deliveries? The old story favored speed and scale. But in a world increasingly defined by volatility, resilience becomes more valuable than convenience. And resilience begins with systems that renew themselves. The question isn't whether comfrey works. It's whether growers are ready to think beyond the bag and start building assets in the soil again. There's a reason experienced growers don't talk about comfrey like a trick. They talk about it like infrastructure. Because once you understand what it really is, you stop seeing leaves. You see leverage. Chop and drop isn't a gardening hack. It's a closed-loop fertility system. You cut those thick, bristly leaves at the base and lay them directly at the feet of your tomatoes, peppers, fruit trees, or berry bushes. No digging, no mixing, no hauling compost across the yard. Within 48 hours, that green pile collapses into the soil. Potassium and nitrogen are released exactly where fruiting plants demand it most. No nitrogen lockup, no waiting weeks for breakdown. Every cut feeds soil microbes, which feed roots, which feed harvest. Then 4 weeks later, you cut again. That rhythm, cut, drop, regrow, isn't labor heavy. It's system light. A few minutes with a blade replaces another trip to the garden center. For growers who want even more control, there's liquid extraction. Pack a bucket with fresh leaves. Add water, let it ferment. The smell is strong, but so is the result. A dark concentrate that consistently tests strong in potassium, often outpacing commercial tomato fertilizers. Dilute. Apply at the base of fruiting crops. Watch the difference in flower density and fruit size. But here's what matters more than the nutrient ratios. Ownership. Plant comfrey once, and for 20 years or more, you have a fertility engine that doesn't send invoices. No annual reseeding, no dependence on fluctuating fertilizer prices, no scrambling when supply chains tighten. That's land efficiency. A small strip along a fence line can support a full vegetable garden. A patch beneath orchard trees can eliminate thousands in purchased inputs over a decade. Even in urban settings, a single established crown divided and multiplied can support container systems year after year. This is where low-input living becomes real. Low input isn't about doing less work. It's about doing work that compounds. Commodity agriculture survives on thin margins and high external inputs. Buy fertilizer by amendments. Buy solutions to problems created by previous purchases. It's a treadmill. Direct growers, backyard producers, small-scale orchardists, market gardeners have a different opportunity. They can stack biological systems instead of stacking receipts. Comfrey becomes one layer, deep-rooted nutrient mining. Rapid biomass production, on-site compost activation, liquid fertility extraction, soil structure improvement, carbon capture. Long-term perennial stability, one plant, multiple functions, minimal ongoing cost, that's positioning. You're no longer competing on yield per acre against industrial farms. You're competing on efficiency per square foot, on margin, on resilience, on control. And here's the deeper shift. When you grow your own fertility, you stop feeding the supply chain. You start feeding the soil food web. Earthworms multiply, fungal networks strengthen, organic matter builds. Each season improves the next. It's slow power. Not flashy, not packaged, but relentless. In a world where fertilizer prices spike, where soil degradation accelerates, where growers are squeezed between rising costs and unstable markets, a perennial nutrient system isn't old-fashioned. It's strategic. Comfrey doesn't need hype. It needs understanding. Plant it where you can control it. Harvest it with intention. Use it where it creates the highest return: fruiting crops, high-value beds, orchard zones. Let it become part of a broader low-input framework: mulch systems, compost cycling, perennial stacking, diversified income streams. This is how you escape commodity traps. You don't outspend the system, you outdesign it. You build fertility assets that appreciate instead of depreciate. You stack functions so one input solves multiple problems. You shift from buying solutions to growing them. And over time, that mindset compounds beyond the garden. Because low-input living isn't about a single plant, it's about reclaiming leverage. It's about building systems that reduce dependency, protect margin, and strengthen year after year. Whether you're growing food for your family, supplying a local market, or designing a small-scale orchard, the principle stays the same. Own the inputs. Stack the systems. Let biology work harder than your wallet. If this way of thinking resonates, if you're ready to build smarter, lower-cost systems that free you from the commodity treadmill, stay connected. This is where we focus on practical leverage, on regenerative income streams, on soil that gets richer instead of poorer, on long-term independence built from the ground up. Plant once, design wisely, cut what no longer serves you, and let your systems pay you back season after season.